Do you like detective novels that include a little more drama than what's just going on in each of the cases? If so, then today's book, The Number One Ladies Detective Agency by Alexander McCall Smith, just might be for you. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're actually covering the first book in a 24-book series. I've already done an introduction to the series as a whole. I love this series, and I would like to cover each book individually. However, most of the books have all the same elements that make me love this series as a whole, so I'm going to try and give a fair amount of synopsis so that I can distinguish each review from one another when it comes to this whole book series. This is the first book in the series, so it really sets the tone, and it's where we're introduced to almost all of the main characters. If you would like to see my effort at trying to pronounce the main character's name, go back and watch that introduction video. The main character's name in this book, we're just going to call her Precious. I have a hard time saying the last name. However, the book starts out describing more than just her life. It describes her father's life. He passes away at the very beginning of the book, but his presence is a big part of the entire series. So up to the book that I'm on currently, he is still frequently being referenced. She has great respect for him, not just because he was a good father, but the whole reason she can even start the detective agency is because he passed away from a lung disease because he worked in the mines for so long, and it was actually how he was able to buy the cattle that gave him the wealth that he passed on to Precious, who then turned that into her detective agency. She clearly respects him, and a lot of her good judgment and a lot of her good character clearly comes from him. And so that is why she is always referencing him, because he is clearly a role model to her throughout the book series. The other main character that is introduced in this series that goes on to play a prominent role throughout the whole series is Precious's secretary, Grace Mamakutsi, who is from a very poor family, from a very poor part of Botswana, but she is incredibly capable at her job. She graduated from the Secretary College with an unprecedented 97% on the final exam, something that she has to reference many times in every book because it is her great achievement. And to her credit, she clearly worked very hard at it, and this becomes a defining feature of Grace. Although we discover some of her other interests and things as the series progresses, but the main thing in this book is that she is just introduced. We will see much more about her life and how she came to be in the later books. We also take on several cases because that is the premise of the series. We're going to see at least 3 cases that Precious takes on. The first case that Precious investigates is from a wife who's concerned about her missing husband. She goes and tracks down his activity and exactly what he was doing that led up to his disappearance. And of course, the wife has all sorts of theories, and a constant through line through all of these books is that there's always an assumption that any missing husband is a result of some kind of infidelity, but that's actually not very often the case in this book series. It tends to be something a little more interesting, sometimes a little more tragic. Another case that she takes on is a very wealthy father in the city in which she is a detective. He has a daughter that's a teenager, I think 15 or 16, and she is interested in dating, and he is very interested in stopping her from dating. And so Precious gets hired to investigate who she's hanging out with and trying to see if she has a boyfriend, and the father's trying to see if he can stop her from dating and from pursuing somebody until she is older, and he, of course, has his thoughts on who exactly she should pursue. There's also another businessman that just met a father that he did not know his whole life, and now the father's insisting that it is time for this man to take care of him, and Precious investigates whether he is actually his father and if he actually does need to help him out in any way. So those are the 3 big cases that she takes on in this book, but like I said, you're also going to see throughout this book just the building up of the world that she lives in. Botswana is a big part of the character of this whole book, which she's constantly referencing the character, the mindset, the ideas of what the Botswanan people value. And on top of that, she's also constantly referencing Botswanan sayings or Botswanan ideas and the way they engage with the world around them. I don't know what you think of when you think of Botswana, but she is constantly thinking of how important cattle is in the society of the Botswanans, even though she lives in a big city, the biggest city in Botswana. And it's not a very big city still. It's maybe 500,000 people. Botswana as a whole is not a particularly populated country, but it is worth noting that Botswana is one of the most successful countries in Africa. I think to date they have a GDP per capita in the 20 or 30 thousands, which is quite impressive compared to much of Africa. And so I think that's something that is constantly going on in the background, is this idea of being a successful and a developing country, because, of course, if you know anything about post-colonial Africa, there's always frustrations and, in many cases, violence over building up governments and coups and sometimes civil wars. But Botswana is very much isolated from that, and that does not seem to be a problem that Botswana deals with. As a matter of fact, Precious all throughout the series tends to have great respect for the government, and it seems to be it's a high-functioning society in which she is able to develop this detective agency. So who would I recommend this book for? Well, if you are not sure that you want to read this whole series, that's fine. This is a great book to get started on, especially since most of the books do play off of each other. So if you wanted to go pick a later book, you might be a little confused, and this is going to be the best way for you to read only one of the books if you think that's all you're going to read. I think it's pretty good representation of the rest of the series, and I would highly recommend it to anyone that wants, again, not just the detective element, but also this effort at trying to get, I don't want to say in the personal life of Precious, but just try to get behind her character and what gives her the character that is such an important part of this book. And of course, we see that in the rest of the books with the other characters, is this effort to try to justify and explain the way that they are. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I actually generally mean that in a positive way. Like I said, with Precious, the fact that her father plays such a big role on her is something that is constantly being referenced to help show how she was shaped. And I think you see that with all the main characters throughout the rest of this series. And I think that this book does a really good job at helping to explore that and helping to set the stage for what I believe is one of the best series. And I really enjoy reading it. These are some of my favorite books to read, and I highly recommend it to anyone that is just looking for either a somewhat casual read and they're not sure they want to read the whole series, or for anyone that thinks that they would be interested in all 24 plus books in this series. Who wouldn't I recommend this for? Well, if detective books aren't your thing, then maybe this isn't for you. Or if you love detective books but you don't think you're going to care all that much about the actual detective or the people around her, then maybe this isn't going to be for you. Or if you're a completionist like me and you just think that you can't read just one, you feel obligated to read all 24 but you don't have time for it, then maybe those are justifiable reasons to not pick this book up. But I would otherwise have to strongly encourage people to read this book. I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoy this series. But if you have a different opinion, or you have something else that you want to say about the number one ladies detective agency, please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and until next time, keep those pages turning.